Let's see if this works today. There it is. My mom would say to my brother, Larry, go get your brother and get him off his walk. It's time for dinner. And he would come outside and put a crimp in the garden hose through which I was breathing. Anybody here have a sibling? Don't be ashamed, raise your hand. Most of our relationships that we have in this life begin with our siblings, not with our spouses, not with our parents. Most of the first conflicts that we have in our lives are with our siblings. I just want you to know that I have won every single one in my family. Not. How many firstborns do we have here today? Raise your hand so I can see you. These are the ones who are to inherit all of the goods of the household. It's called primogeniture. It's kind of gone out of style, but what we decided to do here at Paradise is bring that back. That's our mission in life. I always thought my older brother was a genius. He was one of the top 10 students at Pennsylvania Military College. Then he went on to Yale Law School. In comparison to him, my idiocy seemed to emerge in much greater relief. Can anybody relate to this? Don't be ashamed, raise your hands. Notice that nobody raised their hands at all. And he said this not before he became famous as the host of The Tonight Show. He said this years after he'd become famous and maybe the most well-known talk show host in America. But he still felt that way about his brother. He still had that feeling, because once those feelings get set up in our hearts, it's hard to just whisk them aside, isn't it? Jesus tells a story about two brothers. It's in Luke chapter 15. Once there was a man who had two sons, the younger of whom said to him, Father, give me my share of the family business. So he divided up his property between the two of them. Soon afterwards, the young man packed up his newfound wealth and immigrated to a far country, where he quickly squandered away everything that he owned. And after it was gone, a Great Depression fell on the economy. We can relate to that, can't we? Can you spell 2007? Ugh. Just watching my IRA go and thinking, uh-oh, I wonder if it'll ever come back. And now it's come back and then some. But at the time, it was like, what's going to happen? And since the Great Depression in this country, that's happened about 9 or 10 times. We don't want to think about them, but economies are cyclical. They go up and they go down. They go up and they go down. So Jesus tells the story in a context with people who know exactly what that feels like. He had to get a job, but the only one he could find was with a man who hired him to feed pigs. So while feeding them one day, he got so hungry, he began to think about eating the slop that they ate, for no one gave him anything. One of the reasons why we do what we do, one of the reasons why we are here, is because we are called to be with those who feel like no one gives them anything. Because outside of the ark, it's pretty chaotic out there, isn't it? It's pretty nasty. It can be pretty ruthless, pretty brutal, pretty cruel. But when he finally came to himself, he thought, how many of my father's hired servants have plenty of food to eat while I sit here, perishing from hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your employees. Now, a lot of versions have hired hand, but we don't use that word anymore unless you work on a ranch, and even there they don't use it anymore. He thinks that it's better to come back and be an employee of his father than to be a son anymore. So he got up and set off to go see his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and his heart melted with pity and compassion. So much so that he ran down the road, threw his arms around his son, and started kissing him. This photo, if you don't recognize it, is a photo of David and Sean Goldman. It's taken on Christmas Eve of 2009. David and his wife Bianca got married. She was a Brazilian national. And then Bianca said she was going home to Rio to visit with her parents for a couple of weeks, but she'll be right back. She didn't come back. She took the boy and didn't come back. Then he gets a phone call a week later saying, I'm going to divorce you and I'm going to keep the son here. Bye. Click. It just shattered him. He didn't know what to do. He tried to find help from the government. He tried to help from some kind of NGO or somebody who sees this happen. And what he found out as he did research, that there's about 8,000 of these cases a year now in the United States. Well, one spouse, not always the wife, sometimes the husband, but it's usually the wife, will take the child and just leave in international marriages and then fight like crazy so that you can't get him back. It took him years and 18 trips to Brazil to finally went to the Brazil Supreme Court. That's how tenaciously his mother fought to not let him go. And he was offering, okay, if we're going to get divorced, let's have some kind of mutual custody. Let's do something other than I just never get to see him again. And it was not till that experience, he says in his little book on this, that he realized how much he really loved his son. And sometimes that's what it takes, isn't it, fathers? Father's Day is coming up pretty soon. And that's the day when we set aside to remember that it's not easy all the time, but there's nothing quite like it, is there, dads? I have 2 sons of my own, and yes, they still talk to me. In fact, I'm going out after church today to have brunch with one of my sons, and he's got what they call it. It's called a grandson. That's what it's called. And I'm not ready for that. Don't call me Papa. I'm not ready for that experience yet. I should be ready for it, but I'm not. So the son began his rehearsed speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That's point 1. He probably had point 2, point 3, point 4, a nice illustration, and then we have a prayer. He had it all worked out. He knew he had to do something, some ritualistic impulse to try to make it right with his dad. But any of us who have ever been in that experience, either with our parents or with our spouses or with our siblings, it's hard, isn't it? We don't know exactly what to say or who should make the first move, who should say something first. We don't always know. But his father interrupted him mid-sermon and said to his servants, go find a new suit of clothes and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger. Put shoes on his feet. Go fire up the grill. We're going to celebrate. For my son is alive. He used to be dead. Notice it didn't say, we just didn't talk for a while. Notice he didn't say, he stopped posting on Facebook. He was dead, but he's alive again. He used to be lost, but look, he's been found. I just want to ask a couple of questions about this story today, on this Memorial Day. First I want to ask is this: why does he leave? It might look obvious on the surface, but as you start to ruminate and reflect on what are some of the things that might be going through his head, it starts to get interesting. And a lot of this is me kind of guessing, because the text doesn't really say, so we're filling in the gaps. The text leaves open, and I admit that. But let's ask a few questions of this. Maybe he's frustrated with being second born. That's not easy in a culture where the firstborn gets twice the share of inheritance. Remember the story of Joseph? When Joseph is pretending to be the prime minister of Egypt, and he finally talks his brothers who put him there in the first place to bring his little brother Benjamin there, and they sit down and they have a little meeting together, and they have a ceremony and they have a meal. He brings out 5 portions for Joseph, for Benjamin. And Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Gad and Asher and Naphtali and Issachar and Zebulun, they only get 1 portion. That's exactly the opposite of the way things were done in Jacob's household. That was his way of saying he's special. And so today, psychologists will say, child psychologists, make sure if you have multiple children, you don't ever pick out one over the others. Make sure they're all treated equally. And in an ideal world, that's the way things ought to work. But in the real world, it very rarely happens. And in the tribal world in which Jesus lives and is speaking, it never happens. It's been institutionalized so that the firstborn gets it. So, that means the second and the thirdborn, why try? Why work so hard? And so, did you know that the Crusades in the 9th century, in the 10th century, in the 11th century in Europe, most of the young men who signed up to go over and kill Muslims were second and third-born sons. Because the firstborn had to stay and take care of the estate. That was their job. But the second and third-born, you've got to find someplace to put them. So, he's frustrated. And then secondly, click, he's probably anxious to get out and do something. You recognize these characters I'm showing you now? What film is this from? A League of Their Own. You remember their names of the characters? The one on the right is Dottie. Her name is Dottie. Yeah, Gina Davis plays her. But the one on the left is Kit. That's her younger sister. And when the scout shows up at their farm in Oregon to recruit for this new league that's lasted for 12 years, I didn't realize how long it lasted. While the boys were over at war, then when they got there, Dottie didn't want to go. She was planning on getting married and having kids and having a life there in Oregon. But Kit, being the second born, really wanted to go and play baseball. She was the one who had the urge to go and go through all of the work that was necessary to become a pitcher. And she was an okay pitcher. Until it gets to the big game. And at the big game, Kit is now in a jam, and she's playing against her sister. They're on opposite teams. You remember what happens next? Dottie comes to bat when Kit is pitching. Hits the ball, gets on base, and puts Kit in the hole. So they've got to make up the runs. Then Kit comes to bat, hits the ball, runs the bases, gets to third base, says, hold up. She says, no, I'm going in. Dottie's the catcher, so she runs to home plate, and she hits Dottie, her sister, as hard as she can. How many of you ever wanted to do that with your sibling? Go. It's okay to say it. We're in church. Go ahead and say it. And then, what does she do? Does she drop the ball on purpose, or does she let the ball go because she wants Kit to succeed? See, we don't know. The narrator doesn't come out and tell us exactly what happened, leaves you guessing as to exactly what happened. But the bottom line is Kit is hoisted on everyone's shoulders, and she gets the attention that she's been dying for years. Maybe that's what the younger son was feeling. Because a lot of younger sons feel that way. I never get attention from the parents. So like a stray sheep, he wanders off. And he becomes lost. This is really the bad word of the text. Lost. The good word is found. You ever been lost? Being lost isn't fun, is it? Some of us can become financially lost. We just refuse to live within our means because we know that mom and dad will bail us out. We know that my spouse will get that second job and let me get the cable stations that I want to get. And we take advantage of others. And sometimes we justify it as, I deserve it. I've always been in a situation where I've never gotten it, so I deserve it. Rather than putting others first, we put ourselves first. And we all do it. It's very difficult, the way we're wired, to think differently. But sometimes it gets to the point where, as Dave Ramsey says in many of his things, and he's not the only one, there are several who do this now because it's such a crying need in our narcissistic, consumeristic culture, just don't have credit cards at all. I hammered this into my son so that when he wanted to go out and buy a house, he was told by the mortgage companies that he went to, we can't extend anything to you. You don't have any credit. You don't have any credit cards. And they had $30,000 in the bank. And they couldn't get a loan for a house. So he had to go out, open a Visa account, put himself into credit card debt. Then he applied for a loan, and they're closing right now. Their first house, Dallas, Texas. It's a weird culture when you have to be in debt, credit card debt, to be acceptable to be able to buy a house. That's a strange place to live. But that's kind of what's going on out there, so that's what he had to do. For some people, it's a narcotic. Walter Brueggemann calls it the worst narcotic of American culture. We don't even have cash anymore. Probably if I ask half of this audience to open your wallets, about half of you might have some cash, and almost none of you would have any metal in your pockets anymore, because it's all O's and ones now. If we want to get something transferred, we just do it automatically. We just go to our computer, click, 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 there it is. So it's very easy to get sucked up into this. But some of us become sexually lost. The name of this deity, is a Hindu deity, is Ardhananashwara. Let's say that together, shall we? Ardhananashwara. On the left is Shiva, who is one of the high elite gods of the Hindu pantheon. And on the right is Shakti, his consort. But in some versions of Hinduism in the north, where Hinduism is very diverse and very intense, you may or may not know that the new Prime Minister of India is from a right-wing party in India. And so that's putting some interesting ripples on U.S.-Indian relations right now, to say the very least. The folks at Walmart are sweating bullets right now, wondering what this guy's going to do, because they worked so hard to get into India. Now can they stay? You know, that kind of thing. But they actually join them together in what we call an androgynous deity. And I just put this thing up there. I can't say her, I can't say him, and I really can't say it, to remind us of what's going on in our culture. There are lots of people in our culture who are born one way but don't like it anymore. They want to change. And they might do it surgically, they might do it behaviorally, but they're convinced there's something wrong with them because of the body they're living in. And it's difficult. It's difficult to go to Scripture and see what Jesus says about marriage and divorce and healthy sexual relationships and try to apply that to a culture that's wandering and is lost and really doesn't have any clue where it's going or why it's going there. But we know that we have to be diverse, because the diversity machine, if every other machine breaks down, that one can't break down, or I lose my job, or I lose my place in the culture. It's difficult. It's difficult to do church today when it comes to people who are sexually lost. Can you be sexually lost? Some people would say, of course not. Shut up. Stop talking about this. I can do whatever I want with my body. Really? Your body is still your own after you become a Christian? Is that what Paul says to the Corinthian church? He says, your body is no longer your own. Period. It belongs to me now. So we want to have it both ways. Good luck on that. How's that working out for you? It's not easy. And then thirdly, some of us become spiritually lost. Beverly Giesbrecht was a Canadian kind of quasi-journalist. She claimed to be a journalist, but she never was a real journalist. But she got very upset after 9/11 because of what happened as a Canadian, and she thought it was all of the West's problem. That never would have happened had we not done what we had done in the Saudi Peninsula, in Iraq, so forth and so on. It's kind of the classic culture war presupposition that the East must be right because they're older, and the West must be wrong because we're richer, and richer is worse. So we have to do whatever we can to basically give them whatever they want, or we're not going to have peace on this planet. And she bought into that hook, line, and sinker. That was her worldview. So she changed her name to Khadija Abdul Kahar. I had to look at that name 3 or 4 times to get it right. Khadija Abdul Kahar. Anybody know what the name Khadija means? Or who she was originally? That was Muhammad's first wife. Khadija. So, she decided not only to change her name, but she decided to change her dress, and she decided to go over to Pakistan with her chef and a translator. And she wanted to find somebody in the Taliban to convince them that I'm one of you now. And they kidnapped her and put her name on the internet with a sword over her head, just like they did with Daniel Fleming. And they put out a $2 million ransom. Just like that. Then the next message we got from her was one of those grainy video messages with people behind her with machine guns pointed at her head saying, if somebody doesn't take care of this, they're going to kill me. Well, they didn't kill her, but within 6 months she died of kidney disease because she was starved to death in a cell. It's easy to get spiritually lost. It's easy to make presuppositions about who God is and really don't have a clue what you're talking about. How do we know who God is? Which God are we talking about? The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ? Because if we want to follow that God, then He's different from Ardaninashwara. There, I think I got it right. He's different from the gods of our culture. He has a personality. He knows who He is. He knows what He wants. He knows what we need.